The candlelight trembled across the crystal as my son toasted, "To a future without drama," from his father's chair. Still, I didn't flinch. I just adjusted my napkin and let the insult breathe. As the rosemary roast cooled untouched, their laughter curled into the air like smoke off something burning. The same flame I'd kept alive for decades now lit the faces of those trying to erase me. That's when I realized they weren't honoring peace, they were rehearsing my exit. So I raised my glass and toasted to their future without access. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The china clinked too softly for how sharp the night felt. Candlelight blurred across the long mahogany table, turning everyone's faces into polished masks. I'd set the dinner myself. 3 courses, silver polished to a mirror. Old habits die hard. Southern women don't invite disgrace to their own table. Charles sat at the head now, my husband's chair. He looked comfortable in it, almost practiced. Lydia chatted gently about the weather, trying to fill the air between her brother's smugness and my silence. Rebecca, as always, glittered more than necessary, diamonds too large, perfume too loud for the room. When Charles lifted his glass, I already knew the moment would sting. He'd been rehearsing that line all evening. "To a future without drama," he said, voice smooth, rich with self-satisfaction. The laughter that followed was soft, but it burned hotter than any insult. Rebecca's smile sliced the candlelight. "Finally," she said, "a chance to live without constant reminders of the past." The silver fork paused halfway to my lips. I heard the words, but what struck deeper was the ease with which they were said. My husband's portrait hung just behind me. His eyes, painted kind, seemed to watch the slow unraveling of his family. Lydia looked down, tracing her napkin's edge. She had always been the peacekeeper. I could almost hear her thoughts. Don't start, don't fight back. But silence has never saved anyone. I set my fork down carefully. "Reminders of the past," I repeated. My voice sounded steady, even cordial, but inside, something old and patient uncurled. Charles leaned back, confident in his performance. "Mom, we've been talking. It's time to simplify things. Streamline, really. You've done so much for the family, but it's best if you step back. From the trust, the estate, all of it." Rebecca nodded, as if they were reading from the same cruel script. "You deserve to rest, Evelyn. Let the next generation handle the responsibility." The next generation! I almost laughed. Responsibility was never their burden. It was their inheritance. My late husband had believed structure would protect them, that the trust would teach discipline. He never imagined his own children would use it to erase me. The room smelled of rosemary and slow-roasted lamb. I remembered how many birthdays I'd celebrated at this table, how many deals my husband and I had toasted with these same glasses. Now it was my turn to make a toast, one that would not be forgotten. I reached for my wine. My hand didn't shake. "To your future," I said softly, raising my glass toward them. They leaned in, expecting grace, expecting the compliant mother who forgives everything. "To your future," I repeated, "without access." The last 2 words hung in the air like frost. Rebecca blinked, her smile faltering. Charles laughed too loudly, as if to brush off what he'd just heard. "Come on, Mom. No need to get dramatic." I met his eyes. "You were the one who brought up drama." Lydia whispered my name. a plea more than a warning. I ignored it. Silence stretched until even the silver seemed to hum with tension. The servants moved slower, unsure whether to clear plates or flee the room entirely. Charles forced another laugh, that brittle sound men make when they realize they may have gone too far. You know we're just trying to do what's best for everyone. Everyone? I asked. Or just yourselves? Rebecca's composure cracked first. You can't threaten us like that, Evelyn. I smiled. Small, polite, deadly. Threat? No, dear. Just a toast. The candles trembled as if they'd caught a draft, but there was no breeze. I finished my wine in a single measured sip and set the glass down with a click that sounded final. Charles pushed his chair back. This conversation's over. I agree, I said, standing. My chair slid silently against the rug, his father's chair, reclaimed for one last time. You've made your wishes clear, and so have I. I walked out before anyone could reply. In the hallway, the portraits watched me go. Generations of Hayes men painted in oil and arrogance. My husband's face was the only one that seemed to soften, as if he approved. Behind the closed dining room doors, the murmur of their confusion began. Rebecca whispering, Charles pacing, Lydia crying quietly into her napkin. I let their voices fade. In the stillness of my study, I placed the empty glass on the desk beside my husband's sealed safe. The brass handle was cool beneath my fingers. I'd never opened it without him. Tonight, I would. From the dining room, a faint echo reached me, Charles's voice, uncertain now. She didn't mean it, did she? I smiled to the dark. Oh, but I did. The air in the dining room curdled after I left. Even through the study doors, I could still hear the muffled scrape of chairs, Rebecca's shrill disbelief cutting through the hush. You can't just threaten us, she barked. I didn't answer. Some words deserve no repetition. Instead, I focused on the sound of the latch clicking as I locked the study behind me. That small metallic note, privacy returning, soothed me more than their apology ever could. The grandfather clock ticked against the far wall, loud now in the quiet. My husband's safe sat beneath his portrait, the one painted a year before he died. His eyes seemed to follow me as I crossed the room. For 23 years, that safe had been the family's secret spine. Every contract, every trust paper, every insurance clause built to keep order. He'd trusted me with the numbers, never imagining I'd one day use them as a weapon. I knelt, entered the code I'd never forgotten. Our wedding date reversed. The handle resisted for half a turn before giving in with a sigh. The scent of paper, old leather, and faint tobacco rose out like memory itself. Inside lay neat rows of files, each labeled in my husband's steady hand. Deeds, accounts, beneficiaries. And then, tucked behind the rest, the one folder I'd never touched before, Control Transfer Clause. My fingers hesitated above it. We'd joked about it once, long ago. A fail-safe, he'd called it, for when the heirs forget who built their fortune. I'd smiled at the time, never thinking the day would come, but here we were, and they had forgotten. I lifted the folder out, careful not to disturb the others. The papers were clean, dated, notarized. His signature beside mine, the ink faded but legible. It granted me final discretionary power over the entire Hayes Trust, should the heirs act in bad faith toward the surviving matriarch. He'd loved his legal poetry almost as much as he loved his brandy. From the hallway, footsteps, Charles's heavy, impatient stride. I froze, listening. The knob turned, locked. He rattled it, then cursed under his breath. Mom, open this door. We're not done talking. No, we were finished. Go home, Charles, I said through the door, calm as glass. Mom, you're overreacting. Good night, I cut in, my tone final enough to silence him. The floor creaked as he walked away, Rebecca's heels clicking behind. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then I reached for the phone. The line crackled once before a familiar voice answered. Harold Pierce. Evening, Harold, I said. It's time. A pause, then a sigh, heavy with understanding. Time for what exactly? You know what? I glanced at the folder in my lap. Activate my claws. He didn't speak right away. I could picture him at his home office. Tie loosened, glasses halfway down his nose, mind already calculating the fallout. Evelyn, he said slowly, you realize what that means? Once I file, the accounts lock automatically. They'll lose access to every trust asset. No second chances. I leaned back in my chair. The leather groaned softly under my weight. They toasted to a future without drama, Harold. I'm simply giving them their wish. A future without access. He exhaled. All right. I'll need your written confirmation. It'll be on your desk before morning. Understood. His voice softened. You don't have to do this, you know. I do, I said, because they already did. I hung up before he could say more. The sound of the receiver returning to its cradle echoed like the closing of a door I'd been meaning to shut for years. Outside, rain began tapping against the window panes, steady and deliberate. Savannah rain always carried the scent of the river, heavy, old, unhurried. I watched droplets race each other down the glass, merging, dividing, disappearing. Behind me, the safe remained open, its contents exposed. I poured a small glass of scotch, his favorite, and raised it to the photograph on the wall. You'd have done the same, I whispered. The house answered only with silence, but somewhere deep inside its bones, I could almost hear approval. The clock chimed 11. I closed the safe, turned the lock, and slipped the key into the pocket of my silk robe. Tomorrow, Savannah would wake to another bright, polite day. My children would wake to a locked world they no longer owned. As I switched off the lamp, the reflection in the window caught me. A woman older, colder, and finally sure. I whispered to her, to myself, to the night. Let the silence confuse them first. And for the first time in years, I slept without waiting for permission. By Monday morning, Savannah's sky had the color of damp linen, soft, muted, deceptive. The kind of morning that made even betrayal feel polite. I arrived at Harold Pierce's office just after 8, carrying a single folder in a weathered leather briefcase. His assistant Margaret offered a nervous smile when she saw me. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Pierce is expecting you. Of course he was. Harold had always been a man who kept his word, and other people's secrets. The office smelled of cedar and ink, the same as it had 20 years ago when my husband and I first walked in here to draft the family trust. Back then, I'd watched the men talk law while I took notes. Today, there would be no notes. Harold stood as I entered. His hair was grayer, but his eyes still had that accountant's precision, sharp, unsentimental. Evelyn, he greeted quietly, you didn't waste time. I never do. He gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. The blinds were half drawn, slicing the light into thin, measured bands. On the desk lay the document I'd asked him to prepare. Activation of Clause 7B. Control reversion. He slid it toward me. Let's go through this one more time so there's no misunderstanding. I trust you, I said. I know. But I want you to trust the paper, too. He adjusted his glasses. Clause 7b was created at your husband's insistence. It grants you full and immediate authority over all family assets if any heir engages in behavior deemed in bad faith toward you. There's no need for court approval. Just your signature and my filing. He looked up. Once this goes through, they're done. No access, no appeal. I let the words settle. Mocking me at my own table qualifies as bad faith, don't you think? He gave a wry smile. I'd call it poor strategy. I took the pen. My hand hovered for a moment, not with doubt, but with memory. I thought of my husband's laugh, the way he'd always believed Charles would eventually grow into decency. He'd been wrong about that, but right about everything else. With one stroke, I signed my name. Evelyn Grace Hayes. The ink bled slightly into the thick paper, permanent as a scar. Harold exhaled softly. I'll file it first thing. They'll notice within 48 hours, maybe sooner. I imagine breakfast will be awkward, I said. A flicker of a smile. You always did have a gift for understatement. He leaned back, studying me. Evelyn, you could still revoke it before noon. I could, I agreed. But I won't. The phone on his desk buzzed once, a private line. Harold hesitated, then pressed the speaker button. Pierce. Tell me you did it, came Nina's voice, low and wry. Please tell me Savannah's most boring lawyer just watched you light the match. I couldn't help smiling. Morning to you too, Nina. Well, she pressed, you've waited years for this, haven't you? I looked at the document still glinting under the lamplight. I hoped I wouldn't need to use it, I said, but hope doesn't pay respect. Nina chuckled softly. You sound like the woman I used to work for, the one who could make a banker sweat with a single raised eyebrow. I'm retired, I said. Not anymore. Harold ended the call with a polite tap, but I could see amusement flicker behind his professionalism. You do keep interesting company. I keep useful company, I corrected. He nodded toward the door. Then I'll handle the filing. Quietly. Make it clean, I said. No drama. He gave a short laugh. From you, that's almost ironic. As I stood to leave, the morning light shifted through the blinds, cutting across my reflection in the glass-framed certificates on his wall. For the briefest moment, I saw myself doubled. One woman walking away, another staying behind to finish what had been set in motion years ago. Outside, the humidity had already thickened. Savannah never believed in crisp mornings. I walked slowly to my car, the city humming with its usual genteel deceit. When I reached the driver's seat, I paused, fingers resting on the steering wheel. Across the street, a young couple argued over coffee. Trivial things, probably. I envied them, for a second. Then I remembered the chill of Charles's voice, Rebecca's smirk, Lydia's silence. They had chosen their freedom. I was merely honoring their wish. I turned the ignition, the engine's low purr steady as my resolve. By the time I reached the iron gates of the estate, Harold's message buzzed on my phone. Filed. Confirmed. I looked up at the house. Its columns white, its windows dark, its charm deceptive. Inside, somewhere, they were probably still sleeping. I whispered, "Let the trap begin." And as the first sunlight hit the porch, the lock clicked in my mind. Quiet, clean, and irreversible. By Tuesday afternoon, the storm had passed. The street steamed beneath the Savannah sun, as if the rain had tried and failed to wash away anything of consequence. Charles and Rebecca were already making plans. I knew that because people like them talk loudly, on phones, at cafes, to anyone who might admire the performance of wealth. Rebecca's voice carried across the courtyard as she leaned over the patio table, tablet glowing in her manicured hands. Once the transfer clears, we'll finally have the deed. No more approval signatures, no more waiting on her moods. Charles scrolled through contractor portfolios on his phone. We'll redo the master wing first, then maybe the kitchen. If we sell before next summer, we'll clear 7 figures easily. They spoke like victors, blind to the noose tightening with every word. The arrogance of assumption had always been their favorite language. Lydia sat at the edge of the pool, her bare feet tracing circles in the water. Her voice was smaller, cautious. Mom looked different Sunday night. Rebecca didn't look up. She's always dramatic when she doesn't get her way. She didn't seem dramatic, Lydia murmured. She seemed sure. Charles laughed, tossing his phone onto the table. She's powerless without Dad. That trust was his fortress, not hers. Rebecca reached for his drink, taking a sip. Exactly. She can't touch a dime without the board's approval. I spoke to the accountant myself. Lydia's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the trees framed the old estate like a secret no one wanted to admit existed. You might want to check again, she said softly, but neither of them heard her. Inside, the house hummed with the kind of anticipation that always comes before collapse. The scent of fresh paint from last week's renovation still lingered, layered over the faint musk of old money and denial. By the time the afternoon sun began its slow descent, Harold Pierce sat in his office across town, sleeves rolled to his elbows, staring at his computer screen. The bank's confirmation email glowed in blue. Trust access update. All secondary accounts locked. Primary control transferred to Evelyn G. Hayes. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. And so it begins, he murmured, almost reverently. Margaret peeked in through the doorway. Everything go through? Yes, Harold said. Everything. He didn't elaborate. Discretion was his native tongue. But there was something in his expression that suggested even he was a little awed. Evelyn had always been precise. But this was surgical. At that exact moment, back at the estate, Rebecca refreshed her banking app. The screen blinked, loading longer than usual. Then, error, unable to access account. She frowned, tapped again. Same result. Charles, she said, holding out the phone. Do you have service? He barely glanced at her. It's probably the Wi-Fi. The router's been acting up since Friday. She tried again. The same message appeared. The same polite refusal from the digital gatekeeper she assumed she owned. Lydia stood, wrapping a towel around her waist. Maybe you should call the bank. Rebecca waved her off. It'll fix itself. But the smallest tremor of doubt had already taken root behind her eyes. While they fumbled with their illusions, I sat on my porch overlooking the lake. The afternoon light turned the water into liquid gold, the kind of peace you can only earn after decades of being underestimated. I set down my teacup, the porcelain clinking against its saucer. From where I sat, I could just make out the distant roofline of their newly bought house, the one they believed they owned. Harold's message had come earlier, short and clean. Filed. Confirmed. Accounts frozen. I took a slow sip, tasting jasmine and victory. Let the silence confuse them first, I murmured. Nina had called earlier, offering to stop by, but I'd told her no. This part needed to be quiet. The loudest power move I'd learned was stillness. Somewhere out there, my son was discovering that his card no longer worked. His wife was dialing the bank, growing shriller by the minute. Lydia, sweet Lydia, was probably the only one sitting still, remembering my face at that dinner table. By sunset, the phone on my porch table buzzed again. Not a call. Just a notification from the security system. Front gate accessed. Unauthorized attempt. I smiled. They'd driven here faster than pride should have allowed. The breeze carried the faintest sound of tires crunching on gravel. I didn't move, didn't even turn my head. I poured the last of the tea and let the steam curl around me. The revenge had already begun. Quiet, clean, irreversible. Long before they even knew they were ruined. It started with a phone call. Charles was halfway through his second coffee, scrolling through emails on the patio, when his phone lit up. Savannah Private Bank. He answered without hesitation, the confident tone of a man accustomed to being called Sir. "This is Charles Hayes." "Mr. Hayes," the voice said, courteous but clipped. "I'm calling regarding your trust account. There's been an administrative hold placed on all outgoing transfers." Charles blinked. "I'm sorry." "A what?" "A temporary suspension, sir. Pending internal verification." "That's impossible," he snapped, sitting upright. "This account's clear. We have recurring transfers set up. My family's trust." "Yes, sir. That's the account in question." Rebecca looked up from her phone. "What's wrong?" Charles waved her off, pressing the phone closer to his ear. "Who authorized this?" "I can't say, Mr. Hayes," the banker replied. "But it appears the controlling authority has been reassigned. All inquiries must go through Mrs. Evelyn G. Hayes." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the pool filter. Then Rebecca's voice cut through, sharp and rising. "Did he just say your mother?" Charles's jaw worked, but no words came out. He ended the call abruptly and opened his banking app. The screen loaded, froze, and flashed the same message Rebecca had seen the day before. Access restricted. Contact administrator. Rebecca grabbed her purse, fingers trembling as she pulled out her own phone. "Our cards aren't working either," she hissed. "Do you realize what this means?" Charles stood, pacing. "It's a glitch. It has to be." Rebecca's laugh was humorless. "A glitch doesn't know your mother's name, Charles." Within 10 minutes, they were in the car. Lydia called after them from the veranda, but neither turned around. The tires screeched over gravel as they sped toward downtown Savannah, where Harold Pierce's office waited like a courthouse of quiet reckonings. Inside, Harold was already expecting them. Margaret had closed her door. The tension had a scent, like ozone before a storm. When Charles burst in, Harold didn't even flinch. "What the hell is going on?" Charles demanded. Rebecca followed, eyes wild. "You froze our accounts. You've made a huge mistake." Harold folded his hands on the desk. "Please have a seat." "I'm not sitting down." Charles slammed his hand on the desk. "Explain this right now." Harold's voice was even, almost kind. "Clause 7B has been activated." Charles blinked. "What the hell is that?" Rebecca leaned forward. "Speak plainly, Harold." He slid a single document across the desk, its edges crisp, its seal unmistakable. "Control of the Hayes Family Trust has legally reverted to Mrs. Evelyn Hayes, effective as of 8:42 Monday morning." Rebecca snatched the paper, scanning it. "She can't do this." Harold tilted his head. "She can. She just did." Charles's face flushed, the vein in his temple pulsing. "This is illegal. She's 70 years old." "That doesn't make her incapable," Harold said, voice calm as glass. "Your father wrote that clause himself, in her favor." Rebecca's hand trembled, the paper crinkling. "We'll sue." Harold nodded slightly. "You can, but you'll lose. And in the process, you'll make the entire trust public record." That silenced them. Even Charles understood the weight of that. The Hayes name wasn't built to withstand scandal. It thrived on illusion. Rebecca's voice softened, desperate. Harold, you've known this family for decades. You can't just— I follow the law, he said, and Mrs. Hayes followed the clause. The room fell into a heavy, airless quiet. Outside, the slow rhythm of traffic seemed to mock them, the world still turning while theirs had stopped. Charles finally spoke, his tone low, dangerous. You tell her this isn't over. Harold looked at him evenly. Oh, I think it is. You just don't realize it yet. He gathered his papers, signaling the conversation was finished. Rebecca turned, clutching her bag like a lifeline, and stormed out. Charles followed, his anger vibrating through the floorboards. When the door shut behind them, Harold removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. God help them, he murmured. Across town, I sat in my study, calm, unhurried, the morning light spilling across my desk. The document Harold had filed sat open on my screen, awaiting final digital confirmation. I clicked the box beside my name. Confirm transfer of authority. The system asked for one last authentication. I entered the code. The screen blinked once, then displayed, Operation complete. I leaned back, eyes on the lake beyond the window, and whispered to the empty room, Future without access. Granted. The reflection in the glass smiled back. By Wednesday, the news had outpaced the truth. Savannah's gossip mill didn't need facts, just a spark and a last name. At morning coffee clubs and country club luncheons, the whispers began. The Hayes Trust has been frozen. Rebecca Hayes maxed out a card at Ashford Jewelers. Charles's mother took back everything. I'd always found it amusing how the city's old money could sound so polite while drawing blood. At the Magnolia Garden Society, Rebecca tried to smile through it. Her friends gathered like vultures dressed in linen, circling under the shade of wide-brimmed hats. Such a shame, murmured one. After all Evelyn did for them. Another leaned in, voice hushed but not low enough. Didn't she mock her mother-in-law at that dinner? Poor taste. You'd think she'd know better. Rebecca's smile faltered. It's all a misunderstanding, she said tightly. Temporary banking error. Of course, one replied, eyes glinting. Still, to have your accounts frozen, in Savannah, of all places. By the time Rebecca got back to the house, her veneer of grace had cracked into something raw. She's humiliating us publicly, she hissed, slamming her purse onto the counter. Do you know what people are saying about me? Charles looked up from the kitchen island, where bills and foreclosure letters were starting to form a small, chaotic mountain. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, tie discarded, his composure unraveling by the hour. They're saying what you let them say, he muttered. Mom won't talk to the press. She doesn't have to. The silence is worse. Rebecca paced. We can't just sit here and let her ruin us. I'll talk to her, he said finally, pushing back his chair. His voice carried the same misplaced authority that used to impress investors, not mothers. She wants control? Fine. She'll see what control feels like when I show up. I was pruning roses when he arrived. The old stone path to the garden was cracked with time, but I'd always loved it that way. Honest about its age. Charles, however, didn't notice beauty unless it was bought. He didn't bother knocking. Are you enjoying this? He demanded, storming toward me. I set the shears down carefully on the table beside my tea. Enjoying what? Dear? You've made us a joke, he spat. You've destroyed your own family's reputation. I turned to face him, the sun cutting across his face, the same jawline as his father, but none of the steadiness. You destroyed it, I said quietly. The night you replaced respect with convenience. His mouth opened, closed. You're my mother. I was, I corrected. Now I'm your trustee. The color drained from his face. You can't just erase me. I didn't erase you, Charles. You handed me the eraser. He stared at me for a long moment, searching for the woman who used to clean up his mistakes, the one who never raised her voice. She wasn't here anymore. He turned sharply, muttering something about lawyers and decency, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. After he left, the garden felt still again, just the faint buzz of bees and the whisper of the lake beyond. I poured another cup of tea, letting the heat soak into my palms. Power, I'd learned, didn't always roar. Sometimes it just refused to chase. That evening, Lydia came. No announcement, no phone call. Just the sound of her cautious knock and the familiar soft voice at the door. Mom? I opened it to find her standing there, guilt written in every delicate line of her face. She looked smaller somehow, like she'd been shrinking to fit the silence between her siblings. I didn't know he'd talk to you like that, she said quickly. I'm so sorry. You don't owe me an apology, I told her. You owe yourself a choice. She frowned. A choice? To stay decent, I said, meeting her eyes. Or to stay with them. Lydia hesitated. Just a flicker. But that was enough. I saw it, the moment the fog began to lift. I never wanted the money, she said. I know, I replied. That's why I still trust you. She nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, I saw my daughter. Not the quiet bystander, but the woman she could still become. As the sun dropped behind the oaks, she joined me on the porch. Neither of us spoke for a while. The cicadas started their evening chorus, steady and relentless, like the rhythm of consequence itself. Finally, Lydia said softly, "What do you need me to do?" I smiled. Nothing loud. The tea between us steamed in the dying light, fragrant and calm, as the rest of the city whispered about our fall. They didn't know the truth. This wasn't our fall. It was our beginning. Rebecca never knew how to lose quietly. By the weekend, the pity she'd endured at Savannah luncheons had hardened into resolve, brittle, desperate, but focused. If she couldn't outlast the whispers, she'd rewrite them. Her plan began with a smile. "Lydia, darling," she said one afternoon, calling as if nothing had fractured the family. "Can we meet? Just us girls. I've missed you." Lydia hesitated on the other end. "Is Charles coming?" "Of course not," Rebecca lied. "He's been difficult. I need someone rational to talk to." They met at the Gray, the city's most elegant restaurant carved from an old bus station, where the tables gleamed and the wine came with a performance. Rebecca looked immaculate, her calm rehearsed to the point of parody. "You've been visiting your mother a lot," she said lightly, slicing her salad with delicate precision. "How is she holding up?" "She's fine," Lydia said. Rebecca leaned forward, voice soft, eyes sharp. "Fine? After destroying her own children's lives?" "Rebecca, no, listen." She sighed, playing the martyr. "Charles is angry, yes, but I'm worried about her. She's 70, under stress, isolated. Sometimes people lose their grip. You must have noticed." Lydia stared at her. "What are you trying to say?" "Nothing, dear. Only that if something were medically wrong, it would be kinder to intervene before she hurts herself. Or the family's legacy." The word legacy landed like poison. Lydia pushed her plate away. "You're planning something." Rebecca's smile was pure frost. "Planning to protect what's left of our name? Yes." Lydia stood, her voice low but shaking. "You're planning to prove she's unfit." Rebecca didn't deny it. "Wouldn't you rather see her cared for than vilified?" Lydia's throat tightened. "You don't care about her health. You care about her signature." Rebecca's expression didn't flinch. "We all have to survive, sweetheart." That evening, Lydia drove straight to my house. She didn't even park in the driveway, just left her car half on the gravel, headlights still on. I met her at the porch, sensing the storm in her eyes. "They're planning to prove you unfit," she said, breathless. "Rebecca's trying to have you declared incompetent." I smiled faintly. "Let them try." "Mom, I'm serious." "So am I." I guided her inside, toward the study. The safe was open again, papers spread neatly across the desk. "You see, Lydia, people like your brother and his wife always underestimate the value of evidence. They think power lives in words, not in records." She frowned. "What are you doing?" "Finishing what your father started." I showed her the files: invoices, property ledgers, loan records Rebecca had signed using trust-backed collateral without authorization. Years of misuse, hiding under the varnish of wealth. "They used the family trust as a personal line of credit," I said. "Fancy cars, overpriced furniture, charitable donations that landed in their own accounts." Lydia sank into a chair, her face pale. "You kept all this?" "Your father kept the paper, I kept the memory." By morning, Nina was at my side, laptop open, glasses perched low on her nose. "My God, Evelyn, they've been sloppy." "Arrogant," I corrected. "There's a difference." We worked in silence for hours, scanning, cataloging, converting every shred of deceit into digital ammunition. The rhythmic hum of the scanner filled the room like a heartbeat. Nina scrolled through the compiled folder. "You realize this could ruin them permanently?" I didn't answer right away. My reflection flickered on the dark monitor screen. Calm, controlled, cold. "They called me dramatic," I said finally. "Let's give them the climax they deserve." Nina grinned. "You're terrifying when you're poetic." "Good," I said. "They always did mistake poetry for weakness." That night, I logged into an encrypted email account I hadn't used since before retirement. The subject line was simple: public interest inquiry. Attached: the evidence. Recipient: Savannah Chronicle, Investigations Desk. I hovered over the send button for only a moment, long enough to remember my husband's words. Always document the truth. Eventually, the truth pays you back. Then I clicked send. A small sound, just the faint whoosh of the email leaving my outbox, but it echoed like a door slamming shut. Across the city, the river wind rustled through the oaks. Somewhere in that breeze, I almost heard my husband laugh. By Friday morning, the city woke to scandal. The Savannah Chronicle sat on every doorstep, the headline splashed in black across its front page. "Hayes family under investigation for misuse of trust funds." Beneath it, a photo of Charles and Rebecca leaving the courthouse last spring, both smiling, both oblivious to the rope tightening around them. The article was surgical: details of misappropriated loans, charitable funds redirected into personal accounts, and a timeline that spanned nearly 5 years. My husband's name appeared once, as a contrast. The late Charles Hayes Sr., long respected for his integrity and community contributions. The rest read like an autopsy. Rebecca's phone began buzzing at 6:12 a.m. She answered on the third ring, voice groggy. Within minutes, she was standing in the kitchen, the paper trembling in her hand. "Charles," she said, her tone thin and ragged, You need to see this. He shuffled in, still in his robe, coffee half poured. When he saw the headline, he froze. Then his jaw clenched, and the mug hit the counter with a crack that echoed. Mom did this, he said. She's behind this. Rebecca turned the paper over as if it might offer mercy on the back page. It's anonymous, Charles. The evidence was leaked anonymously. Don't be naive, he snapped. Only she had the records. Only she knew. Rebecca sank into a chair. We'll sue her. For what? For defamation? For being right? The words came from the doorway. Harold Pierce stood there, invited by neither but evidently expected by both. His expression was cool, professional, almost pitying. You shouldn't leave your front door unlocked when the Chronicle runs your name, he said mildly. Half the reporters in town will be circling before noon. Charles's voice was a growl. You came to gloat? I came to warn you. Harold set his briefcase on the counter. Your accounts are under audit. You'll both be contacted by the bank's legal department before the day ends. I'd suggest you cooperate. Rebecca looked up, eyes wild. You're supposed to be our lawyer. I was, he corrected. Now I represent Mrs. Hayes, as I always have. Charles slammed his fist against the table. She's destroying us. Harold met his fury with silence, then spoke softly. She's within her rights, and you're not. The words landed heavier than any accusation. He gathered his briefcase and left without another glance. The slam of the door was final, like a gavel. By noon, the whispers had reached every corner of Savannah's polite society. Rebecca's friends suddenly had appointments elsewhere. Charles's calls to old business partners went unanswered. Invitations that once arrived daily stopped altogether. Even Lydia issued a statement, quiet, careful, but unmistakably distant. My mother's decisions are her own, and I respect the integrity with which she's handled difficult circumstances. In a city that thrived on coded civility, that was as close to disowning her brother as manners allowed. Sunday came soft and warm, the kind of morning that used to carry the promise of peace. I attended church as I always had. Same pew, same pearls, same folded hands. But this time, the air felt different. Heads turned as I entered. People who once pitied me now smiled too quickly, as though I'd won a war they'd secretly rooted for. I felt their eyes, their curiosity dressed as reverence. The pastor spoke about grace, about justice even, and I wondered if Harold had sent him a copy of the Chronicle. After the service, Mrs. Givens from the choir stopped me by the door. Evelyn, she whispered, her tone conspiratorial. We all heard. I just want you to know. Good for you. I smiled politely. For what, dear? She winked. For teaching them manners. Outside, the sunlight hit the stained glass windows, scattering color across the steps. I paused there, looking out at the crowd dispersing into the polite hum of Sunday chatter. I could hear snippets as I passed. She was always the sharp one. Well, someone had to set things right. Her husband would have been proud. I reached my car, the paper from that morning folded neatly on the passenger seat. The headline peeked out again, bold as ever. Drama-free future, I murmured to myself, turning the key in the ignition. I do love irony. The engine purred to life. Behind me, the church bells began to ring, clear, relentless, like applause muffled by grace. I drove home slowly, the sound following me all the way down the oak-lined street. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the widow they underestimated. I felt like the storm they'd never seen coming. By the next week, the investigation stopped being gossip. It became documentation. Federal auditors arrived from Atlanta, polite men in gray suits with clipped accents and briefcases that could empty an empire. Their presence in Savannah was enough to set tongues wagging all over again. At the Hayes residence, the silence was deafening. Charles sat in the living room, still wearing yesterday's clothes, staring at the stack of official envelopes on the coffee table. Each one bore a different seal: the bank, the IRS, the estate board. Each one said the same thing in a different tone: "You're finished." Rebecca hovered near the window, phone in hand, calling anyone who still pretended to answer. "We have attorneys," she hissed into the receiver. "We'll fight this." A pause, then a faint, curt voice. "Mrs. Hayes, the bank is acting under federal order. There's nothing to fight." Her hand trembled. The phone slid from her ear and landed softly on the rug. Charles tore open the top letter, scanning the words as if sheer force could change them. "They're freezing our personal assets," he muttered. "They're seizing the second property, the vehicles." His eyes darted up, wild. "They can't do this without a family vote." Rebecca's voice cracked. "There is no vote anymore. She is the family." He stood abruptly, knocking over a chair. "She's humiliated us, in front of everyone." And across town, at my lakeside porch, I stirred cream into my coffee and whispered into the air, "You made it easy." 2 days later, Harold Pierce arrived at my house with a briefcase and the kind of expression lawyers wear when they've witnessed both ruin and redemption. He placed the documents on the table, thick stacks, embossed with legal authority. "All trust-owned properties, accounts, and investments are now under your sole control." The board voted unanimously. I glanced at him. "Unanimously?" He smiled faintly. "Well, those who still have seats to vote." I looked over the papers without touching them. "It's too much." "It's justice," he corrected gently. "And technically, it's protection. You've stated your intent to preserve the family's integrity, not profit from it. That distinction matters." I nodded, though we both knew how relative integrity could be. "Charles and Rebecca?" I asked. "Still being audited," he said. "The findings aren't pretty." He hesitated, then added, "They've each incurred more personal debt than assets. The houses are leveraged, the cars leased, and the jewelry insured for more than it's worth. Once the audit closes, they'll have nothing left." I exhaled slowly, the weight of inevitability sinking in like rain into dry soil. Then perhaps they'll finally learn the cost of arrogance. Harold studied me for a moment. "Do you want me to notify them of the transfer?" "No," I said. "Let them read it in the papers." The next morning, Rebecca tried to fight back. She called a young journalist, someone from one of those glossy lifestyle magazines that lived off Savannah's social elite, and offered an exclusive. "She's vindictive," Rebecca said into the recorder. "My husband's mother is suffering from mental decline. She's using the trust to punish us. This is elder abuse in reverse." The journalist, sensing scandal, typed furiously. But before publication, fact-checkers called Harold's office for comment. Within an hour, they had proof of Rebecca's financial misconduct, forged documents, and duplicate loan statements in her name. The story never ran. By evening, the Chronicle published a correction instead. False claims regarding the Hayes Trust refuted by verified financial evidence. The headline stung more than the silence ever could. Rebecca threw her phone across the room. "She's turning everyone against us." Charles didn't answer. He was sitting at his desk, staring at a foreclosure notice stamped in red. His hand shook as he traced the words, "Final notice." For the first time, he looked older than his mother. At dusk, Harold returned to my porch, his face a mixture of weariness and quiet respect. "They've lost everything but their shame," he said softly. I looked out at the water, where the last light of the day shimmered against the still surface. "Then that's all they deserve to keep?" He nodded, understanding that I wasn't gloating. I was finishing. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and rain. Somewhere, a church bell tolled 6 times. The sound of Savannah closing its doors on another scandal it would pretend not to remember. But I remembered. I always would. And as the first stars emerged over the lake, I whispered to the quiet, future without access, and without excuses. The reflection in the window didn't smile this time. It simply looked satisfied. By the time azaleas bloomed again along Savannah's sidewalks, the Hayes name had wilted from every guest list that mattered. Rebecca learned the truth first at the Bellevue Charity Gala, her sanctuary, her stage. She arrived in a new gown she couldn't afford, head high, smile lacquered in denial. The hostess met her at the entrance, lips pressed tight, eyes apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes," she said gently. "There must have been a mix-up. We're at capacity." Rebecca froze. "I'm on the board." "Yes," the hostess said softly, "but the board restructured." It was crueler than words. The subtle step back, the way the doorman avoided her gaze. The orchestra played inside, muffled laughter leaking through the double doors. Rebecca lingered long enough to hear her own name whispered behind her before walking back down the marble steps alone. The next morning, every invitation that used to arrive by courier simply stopped. Calls went unanswered. Lunches were postponed indefinitely. Her friends had learned what Savannah always teaches: scandal is contagious. By summer, she'd become a ghost draped in silk. Charles wasn't faring much better. He started taking consulting work for small real estate firms along the coast, the kind of jobs he used to delegate without thought. His old associates treated him with cautious politeness, the way men do when they smell failure but don't want it to touch them. He drove a used car now. The cufflinks were gone, the suits older. Every time he passed the old family estate, he'd slow down, hand tightening on the wheel, as if the house itself mocked him for losing it. At night, his resentment festered into ritual. He'd pour a drink, sit in the dark, and talk to no one. Rebecca would watch from the doorway sometimes, afraid to speak. There's nothing more dangerous than a man stripped of entitlement but not ego. Meanwhile, the house on the lake grew quiet, but not lonely. Lydia moved in by early June, bringing with her the faint scent of lavender and something lighter: peace. She didn't ask permission. She simply arrived one afternoon with boxes labeled books, linens, and a chance to start over. "You don't have to explain," I told her. "Just breathe." And she did. We fell into an easy rhythm: tea on the porch at dawn, quiet dinners at dusk, the space between us filled with unspoken forgiveness. She worked with Harold to reorganize the foundation in her father's name, turning what was once a monument to wealth into a living trust for education grants and housing projects. The community, ever hungry for redemption stories, began to see the Hayes legacy through her eyes instead of her brother's. Sometimes I'd catch her in the study, scanning through her father's old ledgers, her brow furrowed in focus. "He built it the right way," she'd say. "And we rebuilt it the honest way," I'd reply. It wasn't pride that filled the house again. It was balance. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the tall windows, I finally did what I'd been meaning to do for months. I walked through the portrait gallery, generations of stern-faced Hayes men watching from their gilded frames, and began removing them one by one. The air grew lighter with each wall I cleared. By the time I reached Charles's portrait, I didn't feel anger anymore, just release. Nina arrived halfway through, sleeves rolled, laughing softly when she saw the pile of canvas leaning against the wall. "Redecorating, are we?" "Reclaiming," I said. She joined me, helping lift the last frame down. "Feels poetic, doesn't it?" she said, dusting her hands. "Poetry written in legal ink," I replied. We stood there for a moment, the empty walls gleaming in the late light. The house looked new again, or maybe honest for the first time. Nina poured us each a glass of wine. "You've done it, you know. You didn't just win. You rewrote the story." I took a slow sip, savoring the silence that followed. Outside, the lake shimmered, unbothered by history or gossip. "Winning was never the goal," I said. "Peace was." She smiled. "And do you have it now?" I looked around, at Lydia in the garden, at the house reborn, at the ghosts gone quiet. "Almost," I said. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, steady as a heartbeat. And for the first time in decades, the Hayes estate didn't feel like a monument to someone else's power. It felt like mine. But in the stillness, somewhere deep in me, I knew the story wasn't finished. Not yet. Peace never lasts long in families like mine. By early autumn, when the air turned crisp and the magnolia leaves dulled, the summons arrived. Charles Hayes Jr. versus Evelyn Grace Hayes, petition for guardianship and competency review. Lydia found the envelope first, left on the porch beside the morning paper. Her hands trembled as she handed it to me. "He's suing you," she whispered, "for mental incompetence." I took the document without surprise. I'd expected something desperate. Men like Charles always need to believe their mothers lose their minds before they lose their power. Lydia's voice broke. "He'll ruin you, Mom." "No," I said quietly, scanning the pages. "He'll ruin himself trying." The courthouse smelled like dust and ambition, that peculiar mix of history and ego. I wore navy silk, simple and severe. Lydia sat beside me, pale but steady. Harold adjusted his cufflinks as we waited, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "He's overplayed his hand," he murmured. Across the aisle, Charles sat rigid, jaw locked, Rebecca whispering beside him like poison wrapped in pearls. Their lawyer, a young man with too much confidence and too little judgment, shuffled his papers theatrically. When the judge entered, the room rose, a choreography of respect that Charles no longer deserved. "Mr. Hayes," the judge began, tone even, "you're petitioning for guardianship over your mother, claiming she is no longer of sound mind?" Charles straightened. "Yes, Your Honor. My mother's recent actions suggest diminished capacity, erratic financial behavior, vindictive decisions, emotional instability. She's alienated her family and compromised decades of legacy." The words slid off him like oil, rehearsed, soulless. Rebecca dabbed her eyes with a tissue for effect. "We're only trying to protect her, Judge." I said nothing. Silence has always been my sharpest line. Their attorney gestured to a screen. "We've compiled video evidence, Your Honor. Footage from the family's estate security system, showing Mrs. Hayes destroying portraits, drinking excessively, speaking to herself." The courtroom lights dimmed. The video began. Me, in my study, glass of wine in hand, removing the old portraits. The footage was edited in fragments. The click of frames hitting the floor. The glint of the wine glass. No sound, no context. The lawyer paused it at my faint smile and turned toward the judge. "You see, Your Honor, a pattern of decline." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Lydia's hand tightened around mine. "Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking. I leaned toward her. Patience, dear. Harold stood, adjusting his glasses. Permission to present supplemental evidence, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Harold pressed a button on his tablet. The next video filled the screen. Unedited this time. Audio intact. The night of the dinner. Rebecca's voice, sharp as glass. It's time to live without constant reminders of the past. Charles's, Mom, we've decided it's best if you step back from the trust, the house, everything. And then my voice, calm, deliberate, to your future, without access. A gasp ran through the room, followed by the quiet thud of someone's pen dropping. Harold let the silence linger before speaking. The petitioner has accused Mrs. Hayes of instability. I submit, Your Honor, that this is not instability, it is restraint. The recordings demonstrate a provocation most people wouldn't have survived with grace. Charles's lawyer sputtered, "This doesn't prove—" "Oh, but it does," Harold interrupted. "It proves motive, it proves character, and it proves that Mr. Hayes's petition is a continuation of a pattern: intimidation, control, and retaliation against the woman who exposed his misconduct." The judge leaned back, eyes fixed on Charles. "Do you deny these statements were made by you?" Charles shifted, but Rebecca's whisper came too late. "Your Honor, that recording was taken out of context." "Out of context?" the judge repeated. "Your client accused his mother of incompetence while she was executing her legal rights, then attempted to conceal his own abuse behind a petition. I've heard enough." He removed his glasses, the gesture slow, final. "Case dismissed. Petition denied. And Mr. Hayes, consider yourself warned. The court does not take kindly to elder harassment." The gavel struck once, sharp as a rifle crack. Rebecca's breath caught. Charles stared at the floor, face pale, lips tight with something between fury and disbelief. I rose calmly. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. The judge nodded once, not to the lawyer, not to Harold, but to me. Outside, the sun was blinding. Lydia exhaled shakily beside me, her voice trembling with relief. "It's over." "Not quite," I said, glancing back at the courthouse doors. Through the glass, I could see Charles arguing with Rebecca, their gestures frantic, voices muffled. I took Lydia's hand. "They've lost money. They've lost reputation. But now they've lost the one illusion that kept them standing, moral ground." We walked toward the car. Reporters waited at the curb, cameras flashing like lightning. I didn't slow down. Behind us, the courthouse bell struck noon, each toll a reminder that justice, when patient, arrives precisely on time. And for the first time, I allowed myself a small smile. Let them call it vengeance. I called it balance. The chandeliers hadn't changed. Same crystal teardrops, same golden glow. But the air beneath them was different now. Savannah's elite filled the Hayes mansion again, though this time they came for me. Not because of me. The estate, once a stage for arrogance, had been remade into something dignified. Fresh paint, new lighting, and a ballroom stripped of its portraits. The ghosts were gone. At the center of it all, a banner hung above the dais: Savannah Youth Housing Program, Founding Gala, sponsored by Mrs. Evelyn G. Hayes. I stood near the entrance greeting guests, a sea of faces that used to whisper behind fans and wine glasses. Now they smiled openly, eager to be photographed beside the woman who'd somehow turned scandal into salvation. "Evelyn, you've outdone yourself," said Mayor Lattimore, shaking my hand with practiced warmth. "Your contribution has already funded 3 new community homes. Savannah owes you a great debt." "Debt is a dangerous word in this town," I said lightly. Let's call it gratitude instead. He laughed, that political kind of laugh that fills the space between sincerity and self-interest, and guided me toward the stage. The crowd hushed as he began his speech. "Tonight," he said, voice ringing beneath the vaulted ceilings, "we honor not only philanthropy, but redemption. The kind that reminds us legacy isn't what we inherit, but what we choose to build. Please join me in thanking Mrs. Evelyn Hayes for her extraordinary generosity." Applause swelled, polite but genuine. The flash of cameras flickered like tiny storms. Lydia squeezed my hand under the table, eyes bright. "They finally see you for who you are," she whispered. "Maybe," I murmured. "Or maybe they just see who they wish they'd been all along." She smiled softly, then glanced toward the far end of the ballroom. "Mom." I followed her gaze. Near the back, half hidden behind a marble pillar, stood Charles and Rebecca. No invitations, no entourage, just two shadows wearing what pride they had left. Rebecca's gown was a season out of style, the seam straining at the effort of appearance. Charles wore a suit I recognized. It had once belonged to his father. They watched but didn't approach. No one noticed them, or worse, everyone did and chose not to acknowledge it. Rebecca's hand rested on Charles's arm, her smile brittle as glass. I wondered if she still believed dignity could be worn like jewelry. The mayor raised his glass. "To Mrs. Hayes, and to new beginnings for Savannah's youth." I lifted mine. The bubbles shimmered gold beneath the lights. "To futures," I said evenly, my voice carrying farther than I expected. "Without access." A ripple of polite laughter followed, most of them taking it as a witty callback, unaware of the weight behind the words. Lydia, however, understood. Her fingers brushed mine, a silent acknowledgement that the circle was complete. As the guests clinked glasses, I allowed myself a small glance toward the back. Charles's face was unreadable, a mix of bitterness and comprehension. Rebecca turned away first, shoulders rigid as if refusing to witness her own erasure. Lydia leaned closer. "Do you ever regret it?" I kept my eyes on the champagne glass, the reflection of the chandelier trembling on its surface. "I didn't destroy them, Lydia. I simply stopped protecting them." The words felt neither cruel nor triumphant, just true. The mayor signaled to the photographer. Flashbulbs burst, freezing the moment in shards of white light. The applause rose again, swelling through the room like waves hitting shore. I lifted my glass higher. Around me, the crowd mirrored the motion, faces glowing under chandeliers I once hated for their pretense. For the briefest second, I imagined my husband standing among them, his familiar half-smile, the quiet approval in his eyes. He'd built the fortune. I'd preserved the legacy. Between us, balance. The music began again, a slow jazz band, tasteful and nostalgic. Lydia stood to dance with one of the foundation's young board members. I remained seated, watching them move through the golden light, thinking how peace often looks like the life that comes after noise. Then, from across the ballroom, I saw Charles and Rebecca slip out through the side door, unnoticed, unmissed. I didn't watch them go. Instead, I lifted my glass once more, letting the last of the champagne touch my lips. The taste was dry, bright, final. And somewhere beneath the hum of laughter and music, I could almost hear my own voice echo through time, from that long-ago dinner table where this all began. "To your future," I whispered, "without access." The orchestra swelled, the crowd cheered, and I smiled, not for the cameras, not for Savannah, but for myself. It was late October when I decided to finish what I'd started. The air had that brittle edge Savannah gets before winter, crisp, scented faintly with salt and dying leaves. I woke early, made tea, and sat at my desk, staring at the blank page that would become my final testament. The morning light crept slowly across the room, brushing over old documents and fading photographs. I'd spent a lifetime preserving this family's fortune. Now it was time to redefine its meaning. Harold arrived just after 10, briefcase in hand, his tie slightly askew, a small rebellion against the weight of law. "Morning, Evelyn," he said, closing the door behind him. "I assume this isn't a social visit?" "Not today." He smiled faintly. "I thought as much. Lydia told me you've been thinking about amendments." "Not thinking," I corrected, sliding a folder toward him, deciding. Inside were handwritten notes, typed drafts, and one sealed envelope. He scanned the first page, then stopped, eyebrows lifting slightly. "You're cutting them out completely?" I leaned back in my chair, fingers wrapped around the teacup. "They cut me first." He nodded slowly, a mix of respect and hesitation in his gaze. "You're leaving the entirety of the estate, the trusts, properties, and holdings, to Lydia and the foundation?" "Yes," I said. "Lydia has the integrity to handle it. And the foundation will outlive us all. Money should build, not bury." He turned the next page, pausing at the addendum. "And this line here. To Charles and Rebecca Hayes, I leave one personal item of symbolic value." He looked up. "What did you choose?" I smiled, the kind of small private smile meant only for ghosts. "You'll see." He didn't press. He knew me too well to ask before I was ready. We spent the next hour reviewing clauses, checking signatures, ensuring every comma stood exactly where it belonged. Legal precision had always been my poetry. When he finished, he closed the folder and placed his pen neatly on top. "Once I file this, it's irrevocable. Are you certain?" "Completely." A knock at the door interrupted us. Nina stepped in, hair pulled back, sunglasses still on despite the soft light. "You two look like conspirators in an old noir film," she teased. "In a way we are," I said. "Only our crime is honesty." Harold chuckled. "Evelyn's final amendment," he explained. "It's a masterpiece of efficiency." Nina perched on the edge of the desk, scanning the papers. "My God," she murmured, "you've turned their cruelty into legacy." I met her gaze. "That's the difference between wealth and worth." The room fell quiet. Even the clock seemed to slow, as if marking the gravity of what was about to happen. Harold slid the final page toward me. "All that's left is your signature." I uncapped the pen. My hand didn't tremble. It never did when purpose guided it. As I signed my name, the ink spread across the parchment like truth, reclaiming its ground. Evelyn Grace Hayes. There it was. The full circle of a life built, broken, and rebuilt again. When I finished, Harold stood. "I'll file this today. Lydia will receive the notification within 48 hours. "Good," I said. "I'd like her to find out before the others do." Nina smiled, raising an imaginary glass. "To poetic justice." "No," I corrected softly. "To earned peace." That night, I opened the small cedar drawer in my study, the one where I'd kept things too sentimental for safes and too honest for display. Inside, wrapped in linen, lay the framed photograph from that long-ago dinner, the last night before everything changed. Charles laughing too loudly, Rebecca smirking over her glass, Lydia looking away, and me, frozen in that moment before the storm broke. I ran my thumb along the frame's edge, tracing the memory like a scar that no longer hurt. Appropriate, I whispered. The next morning, Harold's assistant would deliver 2 parcels to a rented apartment across town, one for Charles, one for Rebecca. Each contained a single item, the framed photograph, and a note written in my hand. You once toasted to a future without drama. I've simply honored your wish. No threats, no venom. Just truth, quiet, polished, final. When the sun set that evening, the lake outside my window turned to gold. Lydia sat on the porch, reading through foundation proposals, her laughter soft, unguarded. I watched her from the study door, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: certainty. Harold's voice echoed in my memory. Are you certain? And I was. I'd ended the cycle, not with anger, but with precision. The ink had dried, the legacy had shifted, and for the first time, the future truly belonged to someone worthy of access. Winter passed softly that year. Savannah rarely gets snow, just a hush that settles over the city like an understanding no one needs to speak aloud. By February, the papers had long stopped mentioning the Hayes scandal. The world, as always, found a new story to consume. But consequences, real ones, don't disappear. They just get quieter. Charles now worked at a rental agency on the edge of town, leasing condos to college graduates and retirees. A desk, a phone, and a stack of contracts. That was his kingdom now. I heard about it from Harold, who'd glimpsed him once while signing a lease for one of the foundation's temporary housing units. He looked smaller, Harold said when he told me. Not just thinner, diminished. Rebecca was gone. No one knew where exactly. Whispers of Atlanta, maybe Texas. Her name had become a rumor. One people stopped finishing out of politeness. Savannah forgets fast when it's convenient. Lydia, on the other hand, had blossomed. The foundation thrived under her leadership: scholarships, housing initiatives, mentorship programs. The Chronicle called her the quiet reformer, a headline that made me smile. She'd come by most mornings, coffee in hand, fresh from a meeting. We're expanding to Charleston, she'd say, half breathless, half beaming. We're helping more families than I ever imagined. And you're bored? I'd ask, pretending not to know the answer. Half women now? She'd reply proudly. You started something, Mom. But I hadn't started it. I'd simply cleared the way. When she wasn't here, I spent my afternoons at the Savannah Women's Business Council, mentoring young women who reminded me too much of my younger self. Sharp, careful, afraid to claim space. They'd come into my office clutching notebooks, their voices soft but eager. Mrs. Hayes, they'd ask, how did you learn to negotiate with men who underestimate you? And I'd smile, pouring tea into small porcelain cups, my voice steady. You don't negotiate, dear. You document. Then you let the record speak. Their laughter always came first, the nervous kind. Then understanding would dawn. That was the moment I lived for, when they realized power could be polite, strategic, and entirely feminine. One afternoon in late spring, Harold came by. He looked older, a little grayer, but more at ease than I'd ever seen him. He carried no briefcase this time, only a box of macarons from that little French bakery Lydia liked. Retirement suits you, I said, opening the door. He laughed. It suits everyone who knows when to stop fighting. We sat on the porch, the lake glimmering under the afternoon light. The jasmine had returned, thick and fragrant. Harold took a sip of tea, then set his cup down with care. You taught this town something, Evelyn, he said quietly. Power doesn't shout. I tilted my head, smiling faintly. No, I said. It waits, and it documents. He chuckled, that slow, knowing laugh that only men who've lost and won enough times can manage. And what about forgiveness? Do you ever think about that? I looked out at the water where the reflection of the house rippled like memory refusing to stay still. Forgiveness is overrated, I said. Peace is quieter. He nodded, understanding the difference. When he left, I wandered back into the house. The walls were warm with afternoon light, the air faintly sweet from the vase of lilies Lydia had brought that morning. In the study, the family portrait still hung above the mantel. But I'd changed it months ago. The new version was smaller, simpler. Only Lydia and I remained in frame. The artist had softened the lines around our eyes but left the steadiness intact. I stood there for a long moment, tracing the painted curve of her smile. The silence around me felt full, not empty. Peace, not pity. That's what filled the house now. The clock chimed 6. Outside, a heron lifted from the edge of the lake, its wings slow and deliberate, as if the air itself had learned patience. I turned off the lamp, letting the room fall into the soft half-light of evening. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of legacy pressing on my shoulders, only the quiet satisfaction of having carried it long enough to hand it over, intact, and finally, to the right hands. Some victories don't echo, they hum. And in that hum, I heard my husband's voice once more, low, amused, proud. "You always did know the numbers better than anyone," it said. I smiled to the stillness. And now they finally add up. A year can soften even the hardest seasons. By the next spring, Savannah had bloomed itself back into charm. Azaleas spilling over fences, the air thick with jasmine and second chances. Lydia's new home sat just off Whitaker Street, modest by Hayes standards, but warm, sunlit, alive. It was the kind of house that didn't care who had owned what, only who filled its rooms with laughter. She'd invited a few friends from the foundation, a couple of staffers, and Harold, who now lived 2 towns over but never missed her dinners. I'd helped her set the table earlier, polished silver, linen napkins, hydrangeas in a low crystal vase. Simple, deliberate. The aroma of roasted chicken and thyme drifted through the open windows, mingling with the sound of soft jazz playing from her old record player. When I arrived, Lydia was already laughing, real laughter, the kind that bends you forward and leaves your eyes wet. It struck me suddenly how rare that sound had been in this family. "Mom," she said, smiling as she came to hug me, "you made it." "I wouldn't miss the one dinner in this family that doesn't require strategy," I said. The room erupted in easy laughter. Even Harold chuckled, raising his glass from across the table. "You're looking more at peace than I've ever seen you, Evelyn." "Peace," I said, easing into my chair, "is the luxury you buy after paying in patience." Plates passed, glasses clinked, and the conversation flowed, not about money or reputation, but about projects, students, the families Lydia's foundation had helped move into safe housing. Her words carried the soft certainty of someone who'd earned her calm. "I met one of the scholarship recipients last week," she said, voice tender. "She told me she wants to start her own foundation one day." I smiled. Good. Let her. Let her learn early that power doesn't come from who signs the check, but from who knows where the ink came from. Harold grinned. "You should have that printed on a plaque." "Maybe I will," I said. "Right over the safe." Laughter again. This time it felt light. Genuine. No masks, no performances. For once, a Hayes dinner didn't hum with tension. It breathed. As dessert arrived, lemon tart, Lydia's favorite, She rose from her seat, glass in hand. The room quieted instinctively. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, her voice steady, her gaze fixed on me. I could see her father in her then, the posture, the ease, the warmth. "To my mother," she began, "for teaching me the price of dignity." I met her eyes, smiling softly. "And," I said, lifting my glass, "the value of access." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel this time. It was release, the sound of a story finally closing without bitterness. Outside, the city glowed beyond the tall windows. From Lydia's porch, you could just see the banner hanging across the street. Hayes Foundation, building futures with integrity. The letters shimmered under the lamplight like a benediction. Harold leaned back, murmuring, "You know, Evelyn, they'll tell this story for years. How you rebuilt your legacy without ever raising your voice." "Good," I said. "Maybe it'll teach the next generation that quiet doesn't mean powerless." The record spun to its end, leaving the faint hiss of the needle as everyone settled into conversation again. Lydia's laughter drifted through the room, soft and certain. I glanced at her friends, bright faces, eager, unscarred by entitlement, and felt a warmth I hadn't expected. Pride, not possession. The dinner stretched long into evening. When the plates were cleared and the last of the wine was poured, I found myself staring into the golden flicker of the candles. The reflection of the flame trembled in my glass, the same way candlelight once had on that other night. The night my children mistook cruelty for control. I raised the glass, finishing what little wine remained. The taste lingered, crisp, deliberate, final. "They once toasted to a future without drama," I said quietly, almost to myself. Lydia looked over, curious. "What's that, Mom?" I smiled, setting the glass down. "And I gave them exactly that. Quiet, empty, and far away from me." The room hummed with laughter and warmth, but I sat back, letting it all move around me, peace, legacy, and the faint echo of justice. The chandeliers, Lydia's now, glowed softer than mine ever did. And for the first time, I realized that silence could sound like love.